Have you ever tried on a jacket and the armhole is just hanging off your shoulder? You've got armhole onto your arm and you lift up your arm and this armhole is so low it's pulling up your whole blazer and nothing is fitting right in the armhole and the sleeve. Well, if that's you, today is all about altering that armhole and sleeve to fit you perfectly. We all know sleeves and armholes can be a little bit intimidating and things can go all wrong, and sometimes you run into certain issues where things aren't lining up, and what do you do? Well, throughout the process, I'm going to address some of those issues, so hopefully you can tackle your sleeves and armholes with ease and comfort now. Real quick before we start, if you're enjoying Sewing Anastasia, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. And if you want to learn even more about sewing, make sure you check out my online sewing academy and the Pattern of the Month Club. There's links down below for everything. And I also teach classes in person, so check that out too. Today, I'm going to be using a dress form so you can easily see everything, but you're going to be doing the same thing on you. You can do it in a mirror to help see all the positioning or grab a friend. And today we're going to be doing everything to one side of the jacket first, and then I'm going to show you how to replicate it over to the other side, so that way you've got the same measurements, taking it in on both sides. So you can see this armhole, we've got a ton of extra fabric in here on the side, at the top, and when I turn it around to the back, you can also see we've got all of this extra fabric in here, and my armhole should be way back here and it's way out here. So we really need to tailor up this armhole to make this jacket fit better. The first thing we need to do to really assess the armhole and how we need it to fit is to remove the sleeve. So grab your seam ripper and I want you to remove the entire sleeve of the self and the lining. So the whole sleeve is going to pop off. So when you start seam ripping, you can see the little stitches in the seam, which you can start to pick apart with your seam ripper. But if you're having a hard time getting that started, you can always find the opening for your jacket and start on the inside, because that can be a little easier. So you're gonna look for this pin tucked edge inside of one of your sleeves. This is how they close the jacket at the very end. So we're just gonna open up that little pin tuck, and then you can stick your hand in here and we can find the seam allowance that we need to start opening up, which can be a little easier because now we can see the seam and we can start picking apart a few of those stitches to really get that seam open. I know this can be a little difficult to tell which parts I'm seam ripping here, but I'm going to show you everything after it's all done so it makes sense. So now I have the self sleeve off of the armhole. I'm going to do the same thing for the lining sleeve. So now I've removed the entire sleeve from the body of the jacket. And you might notice you have like a sleeve header or a sleeve pad in there, shoulder pad. You can just set that to the side for now. So if you couldn't see well before, you can now see that we've removed the entire sleeve and the sleeve lining from the armhole, and everything here is separate. So these here are the seams that we seam ripped open. So it should be pretty obvious on your jacket. It'll be the main circular seam for your armhole attaching your sleeve. So now we've got the blazer on the dress form and we can really start transforming that armhole. So what you want to figure out is, where is it too big? Where do I need to take it in? Where do I need to bring it back? So you're going to need some chalk and pins for these steps. So you can really see how oversized this armhole is, and we need to figure out where do we have all the excess. Now there was a shoulder pad in here, so we've got a lot of extra fabric up in here in the shoulder. So I know I can take in the shoulder over here and it blends into the neck. So the first thing I'm gonna do is pin up the shoulder. So you'll notice when you start to pin up the shoulder that any of this drape you have down here will start to come up. Now you don't want to pull up your shoulder so much that you're making your hem uneven, but you want to pull it up enough so it stays balanced, but you are getting rid of some of the slack you see in here. And you can always go back and readjust your pins, but you got to start pinning somewhere to see how your fit's going to work out. Now when you're blending here at the shoulder, you want to make sure that you're pinning at the shoulder tip, but also up to the neck. And we're gonna have to blend this seam because we do not want to mess with the lapel on this alteration. That is a really advanced alteration that we're not going to get into today. So we're just working on taking in the shoulder and blending it to the lapel. So it looks like I've got about 1 inch there. Maybe I could take it in a smidge more. And now we want to take a look at this and assess it. And now you can see that the fabric is being pulled over onto the arm. So anything outside of the armhole ridge, or if you've got fabric basically just like hanging over on your arm, we want to get rid of that too. So we're going to draw with our chalk right where the ridge is on the dress form or in the crease on your armhole, on the arm. So tip of the shoulder is there. We're going to do the same thing here for the back. You want to be drawing right where the ridge is, the crease in your arm. This is where I want my armhole. So I did that about halfway down. Now, a lot of times on these really oversized jackets, we're not going to be able to take this whole piece of fabric. We can't like magically pull it up, but what we can do is tighten it up and get rid of some of the fabric. And it's really going to depend on where your seams are. So we don't have a side seam here because we have a side panel on the jacket. So you want to look for your seams. I've got a seam here and I've got a seam there. So I can take in the armhole at both of these points. So I'm going to make sure I'm just pinning the self fabric. Don't get the lining caught in there. And now I know I want to take it in about a 1/2 inch there. I'm going to take it in about a 1/2 inch there. But we can't just take in the armhole, we're gonna have to blend. So we have to blend into the jacket. Now you don't have to take in a ton in the body, but you have to blend smoothly out to some point. Now it could be just to the waist, it could be all the way to the hem. It really depends on the fit you're gonna want, but you wanna blend down. And you're always gonna blend further than you think you need to because we need it to just be super smooth and blended back into the jacket. So now let's do this back side seam. So you can see how we are taking in the armhole up here and we're blending that back into the jacket. So in certain cases, you might notice that the armhole, it just can't get any higher with really distorting the jacket. So if you really wanted this fabric to be up, let's say just like another inch, what you can do is take the extra fabric that you're gonna cut off the armhole and sew it into this space. Yes, you'll have a seam there, but it's gonna be under your arm and it's not gonna be super obvious. So that's one way you can get this armhole higher if you want it, without having to distort the garment. Now we have brought it higher by bringing up the shoulder and taking in all these seams, so it is going to be a better fit. Now that we have it all pinned up, let's take it off the dress form, do some marking, and talk about what we're gonna do next. So the first thing we need to do is take in the seam. So I've got a shoulder seam and I've got 2 seams down on the bottom at the underarm. So we take in the seams first, try it on, make sure it's good, and then we reshape our new armhole here with those seams taken in. And we're doing this because when we cut off the excess for our armhole, we want to make sure it's going over smoothly on our new seam. And when we take in this seam, something here could shift just a little bit. So we're going to get rid of the excess at the armhole second, take in our seams first. So to chalk up these seams, I'm going to flip the jacket inside out. So this is the inside of the jacket. And my shoulder seam is up here. So I've got it turned inside out because we're going to be sewing from this side. So we're going to be marking from the side so we can true everything from the side that we're sewing. So we're going to be marking from the inside. So I'm just going to take the seam that has the pins. I'm going to pull it apart and I'm going to mark on both sides right where the pin is. Now I'm going to remove those pins and get in here at the shoulder. And now you're going to notice the blue lines there. So that's where my pins were. And now what we're going to do is draw a line to follow. And I pinned where the sewing line was. So that's going to be our sewing line. And we're going to blend this into the shoulder. It's going to basically look like a dart. And when we blend, we have to go into the existing seam here. And you always want to double check, make sure things are even. So what I like to do is measure out from center. So on this side, I've got 1.25 inches from the shoulder seam. And on this side, I have about 1.25 inches. So I know we're going to be taking it in 1.25 inches to nothing. And to make this even easier, we're going to fold it in half right at the shoulder seam. Make sure your seam is laying flat. So if you need to undo any more stitching, go ahead and undo some stitching. And when you do this, I also like to take the seam allowance and let's iron it flat to make it even easier because it wants to pop up and lay flat naturally the other way towards the body of the garment, but let's flatten it so we can sew a nice seam. Now that I have the shoulder seam nice and flat, we're essentially going to blend from 1.25 inches out at the armhole to nothing at the shoulder, making sure we're blending and ending in the existing seam over here by the neck. So this is going to be our new sewing line. So now that everything's nice and lined up, I pinned it so everything stays in place, and now we're gonna move on to the other seams. So the other two seams that I pinned are right here. So we're gonna go ahead, chalk them, iron them flat, and blend them into the existing seam. So now we have that one marked and the pins are undone. I'm gonna do the same thing to this side. Okay, so now what I need to do is iron the seam allowance in half so it's much easier to sew and chalk. So I'm gonna go ahead and just iron these nice and flat. If any of your fabric is stuck here like mine is to this existing fusible, just unstick it. It's okay, it's not gonna rip it. Now you can see how much easier this is going to be with that flat seam allowance. So it looks like my bottom chalk mark was here and my top one is here for one of the seams. Even though it stops here, I'm still going to have to blend further. So I'm probably going to have to blend all the way down to here because we want everything to be super, super smooth. So we're going to use our ruler and we are just going to draw our new sewing line here. And there's our new sewing line. We're essentially taking in that chunk of fabric there. I'm gonna pin it to keep it flat. Now we're gonna do the same thing over here. I'm just gonna flip it around. Now that we have the side panel pinned and chalked up with our new sewing line, and we have the shoulder pinned and chalked up with our new sewing line, it's time to sew them together, taking them in, making it smaller. You might be wondering, what the heck's gonna happen to the lining? Well, we'll get to that next. But for now, let's head over to the sewing machine. I'm gonna start with sewing the shoulder seam. It'll blend into the existing seam, back stitch. Now we're done sewing the shoulder, let's move on to the other seams. Now I'm going to do the other side. So here's all the seams we've taken in, and in total, I've taken this armhole in 6¼ inches. I've really brought in this armhole. Now what I'm gonna do is open up the original seam and we're going to iron it flat, and then we'll try it on and take a look at it, and then we'll start cutting back the armhole to make it the perfect size. So I'm gonna seam rip these two seams here where that black stitching is, and then also here on the shoulder. So this is what I'm talking about when I say open up the seam and iron it flat. So I've opened up that black seam and now we can flatten out that seam allowance. And you can see exactly how much we've taken it in and how we're blending it right back into the existing seam. So we're gonna do this to all the seams that you took in. Now all of our seams are ironed open flat. You can really see how this armhole has transformed. It's so much smaller. Now that our seams are all set, it's time to tailor up the armhole. So remember before how I chalked around the armhole so that way I can get like a perfect set in sleeve there? Well, those came off when I ironed, so we're gonna go ahead and just redraw those in. And it might end up a little different since our seams are nice and sewn up now. So you can see that we still have all of this extra hanging out over the armhole. It's almost giving us like this drop shoulder effect, which we don't want. We want a nice tailored armhole up to where our actual natural shoulder is and the crease of our arm. So we're just gonna re-chalk this out. So now we have our new sewing line here on the jacket, but we don't want to cut right here because we need seam allowance. So we're going to measure a 1/2 inch over from the top here, and then we're just going to smooth and blend into the existing piece of fabric down here because we don't want to make the armhole any lower. So I don't want to add seam allowance below that line to cut. We just want to blend into the bottom here. So I'm going to be using a French curve. I'm going to mark out a 1/2 inch at the shoulder up here, and then I'm going to use this French curve to blend back into the bottom of the armhole. And you can see it's roughly a 1/2 inch here. It's just going to blend it. We want everything to remain smooth. That's the key about altering and upcycling. It's just making sure everything is nice and smooth. And you can see we've got a nice smooth line here blending from that existing piece of fabric down here up into the top shoulder. And we're going to flip the jacket over and do the same thing to the back. So this line here is my new cutting line. And again, I'm doing the same thing. There was my original sewing line. I've drawn a 1/2 inch over. And now what I'm going to do is just blend to the underarm with the French curve here. And now this will be my new cutting line. So now we can go through and cut off all the extra armhole on the cutting line. Now I'm going to be cutting right where that new cut line is that I just drew. And I'm not going through the lining. We are just going through the wool layer. When you need to, adjust the jacket. There we go. So now we have a nice new armhole cut into here. So because we've cut into the seam that we've already sewn, we need to go back and just add some back stitches in the seam right here, maybe like a 1/2 inch down, so that way it doesn't fall apart. So I've added that reinforced back stitch there so our shoulder stays nice and strong. Now that we're done with the self fabric for the armhole, we need to do the exact same thing to the lining, taking in the seams and cutting back the armhole. Let me show you a really easy way to do this. So the easiest thing to do is go over to your seams that you already took in on the self fabric and measure how wide it is at the top. So I've got 1 inch here at the top. And then if I take a ruler from the top to where I blended, it is 7 inches long. So then I know I'm going to go over to the lining at the seam and I'm going to come in 1 inch and 7 inches long, and I can draw a sewing line and then take it in the same amount I took in the self. And you're going to do that to any of the body seams that you took in. So now you're going to need to figure out how much you took it in on the shoulder so we can use that piece we cut off. And if I measure that to the edge of the fabric, it's 2 inches. So I know that I have to take in 2 inches at the edge to nothing at the shoulder. So I'm going to replicate this on the lining. And whatever you do, don't throw this piece out yet because we're going to use it as a template next. And while you're going through this process of taking in the body seams, I want you to write down these measurements. So if you're taking it in a 1/2 inch, then blending it 9 inches down, write that down and write down what seam it is because you're going to be doing the exact same thing on the other side of the jacket after you finish this side. So that way we get a nice symmetrical jacket. So since you just saw the whole process of how to take in the self fabric, I'm going to be doing the same thing to the lining fabric. So I'm going to go do that real quick and then I'll come back and show you. And then we'll go over chopping the extra off in the lining and the armhole, and that process is a little different. So you can see I've done the same thing as the self. I've taken in these 2 seams and I've taken in the shoulder seam. Now I can cut off the excess, anything beyond the seam allowance. Or you can leave it here, undo the seam allowance, and iron it open flat like we did on the outside. Now we're going to deal with the armhole opening. So grab that little piece you cut off the self fabric, and we're going to use that as a template. Now what I've done is pin that piece to the lining, making sure I've got the front and the back lined up and the armholes lined up, and I've pinned it all the way around. So I'm going to use this as a pattern piece, and I'm just going to cut right next to the edge of it. So that way I can ensure that I'm cutting off the same amount on the lining that I've cut off on the self. So now you can see I've taken off the same amount from the lining that I did the self, just using that little piece as a template. And keep this piece because we're also going to use it on the other sleeve. And just like before, you're going to go to the shoulder seam and reinforce it with some back stitches so that way it doesn't fall apart. And if there were any other seams that you cut into, make sure you do the same thing. So our armhole in the body here is fitting just how we want it, but now we have to adjust the sleeve so we can get it to fit back into the armhole. And what we're going to do is work through the 2 seams at the underarm on the sleeve. So we're gonna have to take these in and tailor them so that way we can get the perfect fit back into the armhole. So now that we need this sleeve to fit into this armhole, we need to do some measuring. We need to measure the armhole all the way around. We need to measure the sleeve opening all the way around and see what the difference is. And we're going to be taking in that difference through those seams there. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is fold these in half, pin them together, and then we're going to walk it. We're essentially just going to line them up and move it all the way around the armhole and see how much we need to take in. So I've got these 2 lined up. I'm going to do the same thing for the sleeve, just folding it in half right now and lining up these edges. Now that I've got these both pinned up, we are going to start at the underarm, and I want you to hold it until it starts moving away from the edge. Hold it and then just kind of pivot it over and then keep walking it all the way along this edge. And then when we get up to the very top up here, where you're going to have more sleeve hanging over, I want you to just put a pin in the sleeve. And now what we're going to do is measure from this pin to the edge and see how much fabric we have here. So if I measure over, it looks like we have about 2.5, and this is folded in half, so that's going to give us 5. And we only want a maximum of 2 inches of ease, so 2 inches extra in the top. So this is telling me we can get rid of 3 inches in the circumference of the sleeve. So I have the sleeve on the dress form to show you kind of what's going on with the sleeve and where we want to take it in. So we've got 1 seam in the front, and then we've got that 1 sleeve seam in the back. Now I would take some in on both sides, but I would take more in the back. So what I would do, since you're custom tailoring this for yourself, is pin it, try it on, and make sure it's going to be a good fit, and remeasure it, make sure it's going to fit into that armhole. And I'm going to blend all the way down. I'm going to take in a little bit of the body of the sleeve as well while we're creating this armhole alteration. So this is just going to blend perfectly up here into the armhole. So since we need to get rid of 3 inches in the sleeve, I'm going to pinch a 1-inch seam back here. So that's 2 inches. So I've pinned this and blended it all the way down so we get a nice smooth take in. And then I'm going to turn it to the front. You can see we got this extra in here. So I'm going to create a 1/2 inch take in because I need 1 more inch taken in. And I'm just folding the seam so that way I'm taking it in the same amount on both sides, and we are just blending down. So we've got 1 inch in the front, and we've got 2 inches in the back, and you can already see with just the pins in it how it's going to tailor up that armhole and sleeve. So before you start taking anything in, I highly suggest trying it on if you've been doing it on a dress form. Just make sure it's going to fit, make sure your elbow's moving okay, it's not too tight. If you feel good about it, let's move on. If you need to adjust it, go ahead and adjust it. So you can see right where we're going to be taking in that sleeve. So let's turn it inside out and mark our sewing lines. So you can see right where our pins are when we pop that apart. So we're going to mark both sides of the pin with the chalk, just like we did before. And then we'll remove the pins. And now you can see that mark there where we need to take it in. And just like before, we're going to iron the seam allowance in half so it's smoother and easier to work with. We'll iron it out of the way. So we're going to take in the seams on the sleeve the same way we did the seams on the jacket. Make sure you take in your lining layer as well. And you're going to notice that sleeve cap and the armhole of the sleeve is starting to look a little funky when you do that. So I'm going to show you how to address that. So I'm going to show you how to do that as soon as I take in my sleeve. So I'm going to go do that right now. So you can see I've taken in the seam quite a bit here. I've gotten rid of that old seam, ironed my seam allowance open. You can notice that things here don't line up anymore, and especially on the back seam where I took in quite a bit, you notice that these pieces are way far apart and they do not line up anymore. So now what we need to do is reshape the armhole. And what I want you to do right now is write down the measurement for how much you took it in on both seams or any seams, and write it down for when you take it in on the other side so you can make sure you're taking it in the same amount. And if you want at this point, you can cut off some of this extra seam allowance in here, or if you've got it nice and flat and it's not super bulky, you can leave it in there. So let me take you through step by step on how to reshape this armhole. The first thing I want you to do is iron your seam allowances open, and if you have any extra seam allowance chunks hanging off on the bottom of your armhole here, I want you to cut them off and just blend them with the bottom of the armhole so it doesn't get confusing. So I've opened both of these up on both sides. I've folded them back and I'm just cutting off that extra chunk to get it out of the way. So now I've got it smooth in the bottom, but now we've got this here to deal with. So I'm gonna fold it in half. So that way we can see what I'm dealing with here. I'm going to be using my French curve, and I'm going to line it up so that way we're blending from that seam all the way up to the top of the sleeve. So I'm just going to be chalking right along that. You can see it blends right up. So we are going to cut off that piece there, and just through the one side. We're not going through both layers. This is just on the one side. So you can see how nice that shape is looking there. And now we're going to flip it over and do the same thing. And I've got my seam allowances flat over here. So you're going to go from the spot right here where our seam allowance ended to the top of the sleeve. So we're going to be blending this over. And this here would be our new sewing line. And since that's our new sewing line, I'm gonna go ahead and add and blend out a little seam allowance into there. So if I've got a 1/2 inch here at that original seam, and then I just wanna blend that over. Okay, and now I can cut off some of that excess. Okay, and so now when we open up that seam, it twists that back because naturally that's how that seam allowance is working. But now we've got this nice new sewing line working all the way around our sleeve. So now we need to sew this sleeve back into the armhole. And to do that, we need to add our 2 rows of basting stitches in the top of the sleeve. So that way we can cinch up the top to get a nice shape in the shoulder. And then we will sew it back into the armhole. And then after we do that, we'll do the exact same thing with the lining, sewing the lining sleeve to the lining armhole. And then we will have our new sleeve. So I have my 2 rows of basting stitches in, and we're ready to set in that sleeve. And if you need more detail on setting in a sleeve than what we're about to go over, make sure you check out my specific video on that. I'll put a link down below in the description for you. So now we're gonna cinch up the top of the sleeve with those basting stitches. And now it's ready to pin into the armhole. So I've put my sleeve inside my armhole and I got everything lined up right sides together. And I'm just going to work these 2 pieces together all the way around the circle, pinning them. And if you need to cinch up your basting stitches a little bit more to make it fit properly, you're gonna do that as you go. And you wanna make sure you don't get any bumps or puckers or anything in this while you're pinning. Because if it's there while you're pinning, it's gonna be there when you sew it. And we're just going to make sure those edges are lined up, and we're gonna ease this into place with those basting stitches, really helping us get the perfect fit. Make sure your seam allowances are open anywhere when you get to them. And there we go. Just like that, we've got our sleeve pinned into our armhole. We have it nice and eased in. So we have most of our volume in the top of the sleeve here with it nice and flat in the bottom. Now we're gonna sew the layers together with a straight stitch, not a basting stitch, so a regular stitch length 2.5. And you're gonna make sure you don't get any pleats or puckers in it while you're sewing in that ease. So just take your time and it'll work out great. So I'm gonna start at the bottom, make sure I'm back stitching Work my way all the way around, keep my seams flat, remove my pins, and keep checking my ease amount to make sure I'm not getting any bubbles. Back stitch when you get to the end and cut. We have that sleeve sewn in, so let's check it out. This sleeve here is looking great. It's set back in. It looks like we never took it off. Look at how nice and smooth it's set in all the way around the entire armhole. Now that the outside of our coat is looking great, the sleeve and the armhole are fitting just how we want it. But now we need to take in the lining as well. And we're gonna do the exact same thing. We need to take in the body a little bit. We need to take in the sleeve. We need to reshape the top of the sleeve and sew it back in. So I want you to use the exact same measurements you used for the outside for the lining. So go ahead, measure that self fabric. Did you take it in 1 inch, 2 inches on the seam? What did you do to that outside fabric and replicate it on the lining? So in the red thread here, you can see where I took in the body of the lining, and I took it in the same amount that I did the outside of the jacket. And you're gonna do the exact same thing to the sleeve as well. So now I'm gonna go finish up the lining, sleeve, and the body and just sew the armhole together. And then I'm gonna do the whole other side of the coat the exact same way we just did this side of the coat, using those measurements as a guide. That's why throughout the video, I've been telling you to write down those measurements. How much did you take in this seam? How much did you take in that seam? And how long was it? So make sure you're writing those down while you're taking in your jacket, so that way you have them to replicate on the other side. And while you're putting the jacket back together, if you had any sleeve header or you had a shoulder pad and you want to add those back in, now is the time to do it before you close up the jacket. I just want to note that your final step is going to be closing up the opening that you originally started with to get into the jacket. And mine was in the sleeve here. So I'm just going to re-add that little pin tuck and sew it up. With the jacket on the dress form, you can really see how much we took in those shoulders. Our shoulder is actually at the shoulder now. So you can really see how nice this new sleeve is here. Our shoulder is so much shorter. And then we got rid of some of that body fabric so it's not hanging off onto the arm. And we've just got this really nice sleeve in here. And if we take a look from the back, our armhole's looking nice and smooth. And again, we don't have the jacket fabric hanging way out over here over the arm. We've really tailored up this whole area here on the jacket. So today you learned how to take in the shoulder on a jacket, how to reshape the armhole and take it in so it fits better, and along with that, how to reshape the sleeve to fit it back into the armhole, and how to take in a bit of the jacket on the side to also take in the armhole and make everything fit back together. So we worked with a lot of seams and a lot of pieces together, making them smaller to make them fit better. So next time you need to take an armhole, I hope you reference this video, so make sure you save it. Thank you so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions, leave it down below and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. So let me know what other videos you want to see this year and leave it down below in the comments. And don't forget, I teach classes in person and online. You can check out the links down below for more information. And if you want to know what's going on in the studio today, make sure you follow my Instagram stories. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!